We come this week to Parshat Mishpatim, and I think that as we do, we remember the great spiritual importance of turning our mics back on. There we go, that's better. As we come to Parshat Mishpatim, following crossing through the Red Sea to freedom and following the Ten Commandments given famously at Mount Sinai in last week's Parsha, we come in this week's Parsha to, I think, two profound principles that come to the fore to guide us. One, I think, is best crystallized by the modern Hebrew expression for something to be a repairing experience, a chavaya mitzakenet. Same root there in mitzakenet as tikkun, the noun, repair, as in repair of the world, tikkun olam, a chavaya mitzakenet. I once met up with someone in Israel for coffee at a coffee shop where they had previously had a very unpleasant encounter. And they said, well, this can be a chavaya mitzakenet, a repairing experience. And so I think we see that in this week's Parsha, combined with the old saying quoted by W.B. Yeats without his knowing the person who originally coined it, in dreams begin responsibilities. We have the dream of freedom, of equality, of let my people go from the Exodus. And we have in the Ten Commandments, in some ways we have instructions, but they're so general, they really more are dreams, right? Can you imagine a society where no one bore false witness? A society where everyone had the chance to have a day off, in the context of the Torah referring to Shabbat, right? Can you imagine a society where no one stole, where no one took from other people? What a society this would be, right? But 10 instructions really aren't enough to make for a plan. So we come this week to a parsha full of laws, mishpatim meaning laws, and in these laws, we find the way that the dreams of the last several parshas are turned into responsibilities. And in doing so, when Moses, listening for the inspiration of the divine voice, according to what that means for each of us, Moses is sensing these laws that can lay out a plan that can be a just plan, a fair plan, and in that sense, lay the groundwork for a society that can be a repairing experience, by contrast with the last society in which the children of Israel lived, a society in which they were on the receiving end of abject, brutal enslavement, and indeed, Pharaoh's attempt at genocide. This is the chance, now that the children of Israel are going to be free to start a society of their own, this is the chance to do it right, to run things the way that they should have received in Egypt, to run things differently, and to lay out just how different things can be, and to lay out the fact that things can change. And so I think it's very powerful for that reason that of all the topics to begin this parsha full of laws, that the very first topic is actually the topic of slaves, of slavery. This is, of course, fresh in the minds of the people who are newly freed slaves. It is the most recent foundational national and personal trauma, and therefore the first topic on the table for what has to get resolved in planning a new society. And what we see here, as the current day Bible scholar Robert Alter of Berkeley points out, is the following. He writes in his translation with commentary of the Torah, which I highly recommend. The way it preserves the experience of the Hebrew and English and the wisdom of his commentary is extraordinary. And he writes, what is clearly involved here is not chattel slavery, but what amounts to a kind of indentured servitude. You know, like in old New England, where people would agree to work for someone for 7 years in exchange for passage on a ship. The Bible does not question this institution, but sets certain limits on it. And as one can see in the subsequent laws, the slave retains basic human rights. And so I think this is also a case study in one of the ways to understand what the Torah is doing when it does what it does in proclaiming laws. That what it's doing is not putting forward a literalistic word-for-word blueprint that literalistically word-for-word is always the thing to be done. certainly the rabbis of the Talmud, over a millennium after the Torah and over a millennium before us, the rabbis of the Talmud already were interpreting and reinterpreting and reimagining how the word-for-word text of the Torah should be understood. But rather, what I think the Torah is doing when it gives us laws is that it is proclaiming a value and it is advancing the ball of that value so far by comparison with the status quo of its time. And when it does so, when it makes such a stark difference in what it proclaims versus the status quo of the time, it shows us what value it's talking about. And then what falls to us is to further that value in our time, as much as our ancestors furthered that value in theirs. So, in the case of indentured servants in the laws of this Parsha, and then in ancient Israel, once the society was on its feet, we see, for example, this is the very first thing that's said about the laws of indentured servitude. 6 years the person shall serve, and in the 7th they shall go free. Okay, so right out of the gate we got a big difference with the chattel slavery of ancient Egypt, right? Pharaoh was intent on enslaving not only individuals, but the entire nation of the children of Israel forever, for as long as he and the subsequent pharaohs could get away with it. And right out of the gate we got a stark difference. There's going to be a time cap on this thing, right? No one is going to be in any one position of this very difficult situation of this kind of work. No one's going to be in this situation forever. 6 years and then a person goes free, because we're all born free and we all retain that inherent human dignity created as we are in the image of God. No one is allowed to try to make someone else work for them forever. Anyone is prohibited from doing such a thing. Everyone has the right to go free. So that's the first thing we see. The next thing we see is that if a husband and wife are in indentured servitude together, then they go out together as well. No splitting up spouses. No trying to take control of one spouse while the other spouse is free or while the other spouse goes somewhere else. It's not to be done. Every couple has dignity. Every couple has love. And no matter how much societal or economic power someone may happen to have, no one gets the right to split up or control or tamper with some other couple. We all have to show equal respect to a couple, to their love, just as we would want someone else to do the same for us. What power or economic status someone might have is ultimately on a fundamental level an illusion, sometimes even a delusion. The fact that humans are humans with dignity created in the image of God, that love is love, that couples are couples, these are the fundamental things and are not to be tampered with. And then we continue and we see in verse 16 that it is prohibited to kidnap someone and sell them into slavery. That is prohibited. Now you might think that's an awfully low bar to clear, but human history has shown that bar is not cleared many, many times. And so that is prohibited as a bedrock obligation on each person for how to treat another. That such a horrifying deed is prohibited in the strongest terms. And the laws continue that one who is a master of the house is prohibited from beating and killing someone who is in indentured servitude to them. Now again, the very mention of such a dark scenario can be a bit difficult to talk about, right? But the fact is, throughout human history, how many times has someone, God forbid, beaten and killed someone in a situation of servitude or slavery? One literally could not count the number of times. And it is prohibited right out of the gate at Mount Sinai. And then, perhaps in some ways, the capstone of the whole thing, everyone gets Shabbat off. Everyone, no matter what. And of course, it is the essence of abject chattel slavery that the person in charge controls every bit of your time. You never get a moment's rest. You're just treated as a thing, as a cog in a machine. And the idea is that no one should have to live like that. Everyone deserves a day off. Everyone has a human soul that needs to rest. In fact, the term that is used here in this verse about the fact that everyone gets Shabbat off is that everyone should, the bondman and the sojourner shall all have Shabbat, etc., to catch their breath And the word that's used in the original Hebrew is vayinafash. It's a beautiful, beautiful spiritual pun. Nefesh, as we talked about this past Wednesday night in the first of the adult study series that I'm teaching, Nefesh, Judaism's Wisdom for Mental Health. As we talked about, Nefesh is a word with lots of different meanings in Hebrew. It can mean soul. It can also mean one's very being. It doesn't mean soul versus body the way it often sounds in English. It's a different conception of what a person is. It's one's innermost essence, and it can even mean neck. There's a psalm that says, the waters are up to my nefesh, right? The waters aren't up to your soul. That wouldn't make any sense. Actually, the King James Bible translates it that way, and it doesn't make very much sense when you read it. Right? The waters, the psalmist is saying, are up to my neck. And so in this case, the meaning of nefesh is a bit of the neck meaning, to catch your breath, where your breath goes in and out. But the idea is that physical and mental health are intertwined, because it's all primal, it's all real, it's all high stakes. The ability to catch your breath in your physical nefesh, in your neck, is related to the ability for your soul to be in a state of peace, in a state of being healed. And for your soul to be well is as primal and every bit as high stakes as if it were your very neck itself. And everybody gets this, no matter what societal position one is in. It's a very powerful set of protections and a very powerful set of obligations. And it uncannily, prophetically, seems to predict the history of chattel slavery in America, of enslaved black people. The prohibitions on splitting up a couple, on kidnapping people to enslave them, and then of course on murder, and as well as on enslaving someone forever. This is of course exactly what happened in this country by white America to enslave black people, a legacy we continue to live with and to wrestle with. And so it's uncanny the way that the Torah is always speaking to us in every time and place, and always calling out to us. And we see, I think, this very powerful sense in the Torah of the opportunity for a chavaya mitzakenet, of a repairing experience. We're going to create a society, and based on what we've experienced, this time, when we set up our own society, we're going to do it right. That's what we're going to do. And in fact, this is particularly crystallized in the verse that we see in this week's Parsha. The ger, which is often translated as stranger, Robert Alter translates it as sojourner. It comes from the root to reside, like a resident alien, someone who used to live somewhere else and migrated to the land of Israel to reside there. So I think actually migrant is really the most literal, direct translation. No migrant shall you oppress, for you know the nefesh, again, the soul, the life, the experiences, how it feels to even breathe in that condition. You know the nefesh of the migrant, since you were migrants in the land of Egypt. And this is exactly what we're supposed to do. These are the values that this week's Parsha is advancing so much further than the status quo was. Now, if this were a class, if we had a whole hour to look over every word in the Parsha, we would find some laws that we might find troubling, that we might find distasteful, even objectionable. Certainly, you might say not every word-for-word piece meets perhaps OSHA requirements. But I tell you what, the road from Pharaoh to OSHA goes through Moses. It goes through Mount Sinai. Because what our ancestors did by advancing these values of equality, of freedom, of justice, of human dignity, as ideals, and then turning them into action, as dreams, and then turning them into responsibilities, to make it a chavaya mitzakenet, a repairing experience. This is the legacy we inherit. So I invite all of us to take a moment, if it speaks to you, close your eyes, and let's all take a moment, and I invite us all to call to mind, what is an example, either in our own personal lives, or in American society, or modern Jewish history, what's an example of a chavaya mitzakenet, a repairing experience? What's an example of something that was broken, that was in need of repair, and a kind of repair that really did happen, just like the Torah is laying out here? Let's all call one to mind. And now I invite us each to call to mind, what is something that is still broken, that is in need of repair, that is in need of a chavaya mitzakenet, a repairing experience, that is in need of our dreams being turned into responsibilities? Open your eyes. The fact that we have the story of the Exodus and that we continue to tell it year after year is an enduring affirmation that it is possible to make a chavaya mitzakenet. It is possible to make a repairing experience. Doesn't mean it's easy, but it is possible. The fact that our ancestors advanced these values so much further than the status quo is a torch they carried forward and that they're passing to us. And so when we run forward with the torch, we know we're not alone. Our ancestors, you might say, are running right there with us, full of encouragement for us and solidarity for us and love. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.